Hi, and welcome to the Waterbrook Online. It's so exciting to just sit in the house and be able to talk with you. I'm so excited about this new series that we're trying to bring out in this period of time. I think it's important for us to just talk because you know what COVID did, it presented us an opportunity to teach and preach the word. But now what I want to do is do some discussions about relevant topics that are here now, because today's topic I had talked about exactly a year before it actually occurred in our country. Yes, I'm going to go there. The topic of cults, the 5 characteristics of cults. Stay with me as we go into today's topic right here on the Waterbrook Online. Africa. Welcome back. I'm really excited about today's topic. The first thing I want to say is that what has happened in Kenya, in Shakahola, in Kilifi district near Malindi, Kilifi County near Malindi, is to me a great tragedy. And in fact, I wanted to talk about it immediately, but I felt it was a little bit insensitive to the families and the people who are involved. But I think it bears import. I was in a town hall meeting recently where 4 of us pastors, people who had been pastors or ministers or people with some kind of thinking influence from a new generation of believers or leaders in the church were put to task by our presenters. And it's you can actually watch it. It was a 3-hour-long town hall hosted by Dennis Akari and Mark Masai on the social newsroom. It's a very important topic, and I'd recommend that you go to it. I think what we'll do is we'll insert the link here as well. I think it's important for us to talk about these things because when I talked about it last year, this is April of 2021, it seemed like some far-fetched thing, but now I begin to understand how prophetic and how important those warnings were. And it seemed a very casual way. In fact, what I remember looking now back at that topic and looking back at those notes and listening to that, I now realize how lightly we were dealing with something that was very serious. So I want to revisit that today in talking about the 5 characteristics of a cult, but also to really understand what does it mean? What does all this mean? Where are we on this particular topic? And so we'll be following this in series. So I'm going to start today and then we'll probably see how far we can go with today's topic. We'll continue next time and keep going with some of these topics. So today I want to go into 5 characteristics of a cult, but I want us to look at the scriptures. Scripture reading today, 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 8. It says, For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. See what Paul is saying. Our appeal, the thing that we're doing, the thing that we're saying is not coming from a place of error. We're not erroneously translating the word of God. We're not being impure about it or an attempt to deceive. And we'll look at that in a little bit of detail today. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak not to please men, but to please God who tests our hearts. Watch this. He says, For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. And I think that's pretty much covered all 5 points. God is witness, nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, that we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. Paul is saying something very important here. He's saying that they were willing to go beyond the bodyguards, go beyond all this stuff that we put, all these personal assistants and bodyguards, and touch not the anointed nonsense that we've put up, and allow themselves to be touched, allow themselves to minister, allow themselves to become a part of this family of believers in Thessalonica. And I think it's important for us to begin to see the difference. Now, I want to quickly say also, let's look at Psalm 146, verse 3 to 4. I'm really just trying to dissect from a biblical standpoint, what these characteristics are. That's just one basic scripture that shows us something. Let's look at it again. It says, he says, our appeal does not spring from error. So some people go into a place of error, some people impurity or impure motives, or attempts to deceive. And then he goes on further down, nor a pretext for greed, nor did we seek glory from people. So if you break it down, those are the 5 things. The 5 things, more or less, that speak about what the characteristics. Of course there are more, but we want to look at that today. Psalm 146, 3 to 4 says, put not your trust in princes, in a son of man in whom there is no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth. On that very day, his plans perish. So the recent happenings, and a year ago, the happenings big story was Hillsong's pastor in Australia and New York. But this year, the BBC investigation, this was last year, BBC did an investigation called Faith Under Fire. And it revealed a whole lot of things that unsettled us. But if that was unsettling, if that didn't wake us up, then Shakahola surely is a punch in the chest and a slap in the face to tell us that there's something completely wrong with how it is that we've been running church and how we've been calling this church thing, and the clamor now for deregistering churches or creating laws, and when there are laws already in place that help us to what I'm calling now the penal code, and they're able to pursue these things. The laws, and what I spoke at the town hall, the laws, I don't, my personal opinion is that the law will never be able to fully interrogate meaning. The law won't be able to fully interrogate people's hearts, because you can have regulation. We were talking a little earlier with Jose about 10 years ago. Was it 10 years ago? No. 2005 is not 10 years ago. It's a long time. So there was something introduced called the Mishuki laws that were an effort to streamline the matatu industry, and they worked. But as soon as Mr. Mishuki died, and as soon as that Kibaki government went away, we're back to our old madness. So think about it. There's a law. There are laws that govern the way vehicles should operate. There are laws that govern the way public service vehicles, but we still flout these. We still flagrantly flout these rules. And the reason is, laws, when they're made, and this is what Paul was trying to argue, that every time that the law is constructed, our human nature desires to break it. If you ever see a sign that says wet paint, guess what? You're going to see a lot of people trying to touch that wall that says wet paint. The thing that's happened at Shakahola, as tragic as it seems, and I remember talking with Dennis Okari. Dennis Okari, by the way, some years ago did investigative research and presented a show. In fact, it was a series exposing some of these shenanigans that some of the preachers were doing. And there was the whole 310 scandal, and there was all this nonsense, potassium permanganate, and that whole madness. Those people were named, and in fact, it was possible that there was criminal behavior. But the lack of prosecution, for me, tells us just how weak the law is to really follow after people if nobody has gone forward to say, I was robbed, or I was conned, or I lost a loved one. So we wait to see what happens. But I really want us to look at some of these things because what it's done, it's made many believers who had attended these churches or interacted with these churches, it's made people become jaded and even shaken some people's faith. What has happened as a result, if you look at the internet and the social media after these events, is that there was a whole lot of a slew of diatribe that came out. People who are bitter about churches that were not even involved. And I saw people saying, such and such a person needs to be investigated. And hata huyu inabidi sasa chunguzwe. And this whole thing that these people need to be investigated. In fact, I saw the names of big, well-established churches like Sitam up there. But it tells me something, that there's a disaffection. There's a disaffection with the church and the organs and the current structure. And I think it's safe to say that we need to really understand some of the things. And I'd really like us to pay attention. There's some things that were shared in that town hall that I think were important in helping us. And I think we'll look at that towards the end. How do we protect ourselves against this? What's happened is unacceptable. But here's the thing I'm saying. I've met many young people who have had unfortunate experiences with real pastors, but some who have met unfortunate circumstances under fake pastors and fake prophets, what we call fake prophets and church leaders. And that isn't to defend the actions. I don't want to defend the actions of any of these men or purported men of God. What I'm not here to pass judgment on this, but to point us to some things, because we're saying don't judge, but what has happened at Shakahola, what is happening in some of these other churches is unacceptable. It's ungodly and it's not right. It's completely unbiblical. So many believers have put their faith in these leaders, and as a result, we have these crashes. You have people whose entire lives have changed. So let me look at some of the characteristics and understand this trend before I look at those 5 characteristics. So why the fallout? Number one, this fallacy of an inerrant authority. There's a fallacy of inerrant authority. This is why people can say things like, touch not God's anointed, touch not, that's nonsense. A man of God, of whatever standing, needs to be able to stand up to scrutiny. He needs to be able to stand up to scrutiny. The fact that somebody is investigating your pastor should raise alarms, but then the fact that they're investigating should raise alarms isn't to say that he is guilty. I think it's important for us to begin to understand that difference. But here's the thing that I'm saying. The fact that a man of God should, in fact, what the Bible teaches us, that he should be above reproach. And above reproach means be above reproach, so that even the thought of accusing, there's some people now, some pastors, some men of God, that if you say they were accused, you say, there's no way. That's what I'm talking about. That's called above reproach. So the first thing is that whole idea of I'm above, I'm inerrant, that fallacy of inerrant authority. The New Testament leader is not above investigation. That person is subject to what we call the conference of the priesthood, where we're subject to other people in our circles, where now other pastors can call me out. Unfortunately, many of us have over time become lone rangers. And I remember when I was starting the Waterbrook Church in early 2000s, looking for the kind of what they call covering that says you're ours. And I was so grateful to Emmanuel Church and the leadership of Dr. Beta Mengistu and the rest of the congregation, who were able to keep us in check and still keep us in check. If I always say to people, if something happens, feel free to call Dr. Beta Mengistu, feel free to call Dr. Wale Akinyemi. These are people who are basically I'm subject to. Now, unfortunately, there's not always a clear system. So this is the second thing. The failure of a system that elevates its leaders and teaching above biblical truth or scrutiny. So we're seeing that the first thing, that in the fallacy of inerrant authority, that's pride. The second thing here is that where we're elevating our leaders and they're teaching above biblical truth or scrutiny, that's lovers of self. And Paul says that in the last days there will be people who will be proud, lovers of self. So that's the second thing. The third thing that Paul talks about is in his letter to Timothy is the advent of a materialistic teaching. We call them lovers of money, in which we've seen Paul talking about here in 1 Thessalonians. So the last days, according to Paul, is really what it is. So these are the reasons why there's a fallout. This pride, loving of self, loving of money. In my experience of over 30 years of ministry, almost 20 years of that spent as the senior pastor, I found 5 categories of ministers, and I will look at that a little later. But let's look at the 5 characteristics. Let's go straight into that now. So I want to say the 5 characteristics of a cult leader, of a cult, is that they have, number 1, a charismatic leader, very charismatic. And if you look at almost every cult, that's what it has. The second thing they do is that's important is they break away from the main branch of a major faith. You'll always find that cult leaders are breaking away from I'll come back to this in a bit. Number 3 is what we call ideological purity and social antagonism. So they have this idea that we are the ones who have this knowledge and you guys don't. Other people don't have this idea, and in fact it's us against them. These guys don't understand the revelation that we're walking in. Number 4, which is almost close to this last one that I said, they focus on some kind of new teaching. Very often this apocalyptic teaching, in fact almost always an apocalyptic teaching, not always but almost always. And then an isolation from family and friends. And I want to point out that that isolation, usually going to taking all these things, your charismatic leader, breaking away from this branch, isolation, ideological antagonism and all that, and focusing on these apocalyptic things, and then they move to some remote place and station themselves there. This seems to be a characteristic. Let me go through before Shakahola. Shakahola, of course, is with us, and you can look up that. The last count was 200 people who've perished in 2023, and it looks like it goes a little further back. Over 200 people at the last count. By last week, it was over 200 people who'd been uncovered in these shallow graves. That was Shakahola, but and this was led by this gentleman, Mackenzie. But if we go back, I remember as far back as 1978. Over 900 people died. In fact, I think it was 909 people, maybe more. In Guyana, there was a pastor. His name was the Reverend Jim Jones, and he started the People's Temple. And the People's Temple began in California. He moved to California, started this movement, and you can actually look it up. It's actually quite interesting. But Reverend Jim Jones started this ministry, very charismatic fellow. In fact, if you see any video of him, you'd understand why. Just this charismatic fellow, you can easily follow him. He started this thing called the People's Temple, and then when pressure and so-called persecution came, he moved to a big plot of land in the nation of Guyana, and there in 1978 led over 900 people, including children, to their deaths by some kind of what was seen as some kind of sacrament that they were taking, but it was a Kool-Aid that was laced with cyanide to help these people transition into the next world. And really what it was is murder. It was murder. 1978. In 1993, close to 80 people died. I think it was 80 people died in Waco in Texas. The gentleman's name there was David Koresh. He officially changed his name to David Koresh. And he began something called the Branch Davidian, which was sort of like a branch away from Adventist teaching. And that Branch Davidian started teaching some apocalyptic things. And when the news media heard about it, when the FBI heard about it, when the police heard about it, they raided this guy's remote place that they were in. And there was explosions, there was gunfire, it was terrible. That story has also been very well documented. 80 people died, Waco, Texas. All religious teaching. Can you imagine? 80 people died for this religious teaching. And if you think that this is just something in the West, in fact, I could have picked many cults or cult leaders, things from Japan, from Australia, from South America. But these are just a few that I picked. I want to pick one last one from Uganda in the year 2000, which is very close to us. Many people were alive when this was happening. Over 700, close to 800 people died in Uganda when the lady's name was Credonia Mwerinde, and a gentleman called Joseph Chibwetere. They started a thing called the movement. It was called the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments. And they started this movement ostensibly to, what it's saying, to return people to the Ten Commandments, with the idea that that the world was ending. This was their thing. And the thing is, these guys didn't come from what we call a Pentecostal or charismatic movement. They came from the Catholic Church, and they were saying that they had apparitions of the Virgin Mary and all sorts of other things that they were saying, and they drew these people away to a remote place, lived in a commune, and what ended up happening? They actually murdered close to 800 people. Now, what if we see these things over and over again? What do we see? What are the commonalities? Number one, a charismatic leader. Jim Jones, David Koresh, Credonia Mwerinde. These people were charismatic. In fact, Mwerinde was the one who was seeing these visions, but Joseph Chibwetere seems to be the spokesperson in Uganda. This is part of the commonality. They're charismatic. They're able to lead people, able to talk to people, able to persuade people. So the charisma of the leader, which is why we say, if all our focus is on the leader and the charisma of the leader, then you're not following Jesus. You're not following Jesus. And this is important for us to understand. So the charismatic leader, what's another commonality? They broke away from the main branch of a major faith. In fact, if you look at David Koresh's, they call it the branch Davidian. They were moving away from the branch. So they were saying we're moving away. So the branch Davidian. Mwerinde and Chibwetere, the same thing, moving away. Jim Jones, there seems to be a break away from the major branches. Thirdly, this idea of ideological purity and social antagonism. Us against them. That we have a pure idea. Those guys don't know what they're talking about. We have the true revelation. That idea, when you start to hear that, whether you're talking about this altar movement in Kenya that has tens of thousands, in fact, probably hundreds of thousands of people sweeping streets some days for the so-called greatest prophet Elijah and what have you. That whole stuff, it says something. Is a focus on some new teaching, very often apocalyptic. If you think about what Dr. Owor is teaching, if you think about many of these big movements, what it is they're teaching about the end times, what we as people in the church call eschatology. And it's very often apocalyptic. And they seem to be the ones, they say that they're the ones to bring this great revelation. And I say, this is always funny, that they always say, I'm Elijah, and sometimes Moses. They never say things like, God has called me to be Obadiah. God has called me to be Amos. They're always talking about Elijah and Moses, because they want to identify as those biblical characters that we see showing up in the time of Jesus, biblical characters showing up in the book of Revelation. So what they want to do is align themselves and say that I found myself in the scriptures. And I've heard people preach this thing, find yourself in the scriptures. And the danger with doing something like that is that somebody like me, whose name is Peter, I can find myself in the scriptures and begin to call myself on this rock, the church shall be built. God spoke to me directly in the scriptures. I can start to say that he called my name. Which is of course error. That's erroneous completely. That's completely erroneous. But some of these guys, this is what they're doing. So that focus on some new teaching, especially this apocalyptic thing, and then this isolation from family and friends, this is important. There's another thing here that I think it bears paying attention to, which is mind-altering practices and unusual devotion. And I think this is important. So some of these people have what we call mind-altering practices, such as sleep deprivation, the use of drugs sometimes, and those kind of things. Extended times of fasting, because what you see with Shakahola, for example, is sleep deprivation, and fasting, which makes the body weak. It makes the body weak. Now, listen. Christians are not the only ones who fast. Hindus fast, Muslims fast, witches fast. Fasting is common in many of the religions. But here's the thing that fasting does, and I think this is important, is that even science is showing us that when we fast, it opens the body to an understanding of the subconscious and things that we don't ordinarily experience with our five senses. And listen, God requires us to be devoted to one another, to be devoted to the body of Christ. That's important. But if all you do, and this is another thing. Now, some of us, all we do is we go for morning glory, lunch hour meeting, evening meeting, and all we do, we don't have a social life, don't have a family life. Our entire life is built around church. Does that ring a bell? There's many churches today, which are borderline cultic, where everything is surrounding the man or woman of God, and people have this undying devotion, unusual undying devotion to the man of God or to this church. And if you begin to get into a conversation with them about this thing, they say, and the Bible even says that I have come to bring a sword between fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. They say it's not unusual. They quote that. But here's the thing. If you deny, Paul says that if you deny your family members, you're worse than an unbeliever. So some of these things are mind altering, because you're spending time. Some people even leave work to now be devoted. You find there's stories in the newspapers all the time. Wealthy family. It's in the public arena now. Where there's contention about a large estate of a certain family, and the family, one part of the family is suing one of the brothers to say that this person is tied to this so-called prophetess who has used part of the family's name and what are they called? Titles to obtain loans and things for land that wasn't even hers. This is the thing that I'm saying to us, is that we really have to watch out for these things. So I think this is important. So I'm saying this because I feel it's of critical importance for us to have a great understanding of what it is. These are 5, maybe 6 of the signs or characteristics of a cult. But next time, join me to begin to understand, how do we walk away from these people? How is it that we can guard ourselves? How is it that we can create the kind of buffers that help us with dealing with these people? And I'll show you in the next episode the kinds of people that they are. I call them the 5 Ds that are important. But let me finish by saying these quick things. And these are instructions that I will expand on in the next episode. Number 1, stay close to a Bible-believing church, a Bible-believing and teaching. Now, that is not to say that these people are using Bibles. They're using Bibles, and I'll explain a little bit further. But people who rightly divide the word of truth. So stay close to a Bible-believing church. Query questionable. Number 2, query questionable teachings or behavior. Query questionable teachings or behavior. The pastor who comes to your church, or the people who go to this place where there's some strange behavior that cannot be supported by the Bible, that's a place that you need to run away from quickly. Number 3, avoid militant, terrorist-like groupings. Things that now make you look like terrorists. And people can't hold, you change your clothes, put on these long clothing, and you look like somebody from a militant Islamist group. And anytime somebody questions you, you want to have a fight. Am I talking to you? Listen, avoid militant, terrorist-like groupings. Number 4, positive one now. Have a proper understanding of end times. That is eschatology, the teaching of eschatology, and basically how people fixate on revelations and the end times and so on, because there's a whole lot going on, and there's the internet, and there's a whole lot of these things. And we talked a little bit about this thing in our town hall, and it bears some watching. I think it's important, and it may take time. It was a long town hall, but I think it's important for us to listen to. Pastor Tony Mwangi spoke some fantastic things there about what eschatology is. And then number 5, develop a healthy relationship with family and friends. That helps us. They can check on you and you can check on them and vice versa. And they can also check you when you're saying, hey, pastor said. Somebody who's able to look at you and say, yeah, I need this pastor, he's everything. When people ask those questions, don't get offended. Say, oh yeah, I know. Thank you for your concern. Thank you for your concern. This is what we're looking at, so that you're not antagonistic. Well, that's all for today. I'll see you next time. Thank you for staying with us right here on the Waterbrook Online. See you next time. Thank you for staying with us all the way until the end. What a blessing. The process, trust the process. God is taking us through a process. I want to appreciate your being here with us, and I really like to encourage us to do a couple of things. The first thing I'd like you to do is to like and subscribe. Like the video and subscribe. And then the third thing is to share. 1, 2, 3. Like, subscribe, share. It's really that simple. Now, the reason I ask this is not because we're trying to be influencers or trend. That's not the idea. The idea is so that more videos just like this can then be recommended to you and to your friends. So when you like it, this is the way the algorithm works. When you subscribe, it's the way the algorithm works. And then here's the other thing. When you share, other people are blessed because of what it is that you've done. So I want you to please do me a favor and share it. Share it with somebody else. The second thing that I want to ask you to do is to continue to support us. Support us through your contributions, your financial contributions. And that's really easy for you to do. You can put a standing order in your bank account to give to the Waterbrook Ministry, or you can furnish us with those funds through our mobile money platform. Our bank account is the Waterbrook Ministry, held at Stanbic Bank Kenya, Kenyatta Avenue branch, and the account details are on the screen. 010,000 286 7596. That's Waterbrook Ministry, Stanbic Bank Kenya, Kenyatta Avenue branch. The account number is 010,000 286 7596. Our mobile money platform, M-Pesa, is 345086. It's a pay bill, 345086, and the account details is either your name or your reason for giving. And the Lord will bless you. Thank you for staying with us right here on the Waterbrook Online. The Lord bless you until next time.